And good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I really appreciate you being with me. And I hope you had a fantastic weekend. Went to a swap meet over the weekend in Decatur, Texas. I was supposed to leave on Friday, or excuse me, I was supposed to leave on Thursday, because that's setup day. And traditionally, setup day is a good day to be there to find bargains, right? Well, uh, Thursday morning came and it was, I think, 10 degrees indicator. And I'm like, no. I'm telling you, I am absolutely not a cold weather person. I tell people all the time anything below 50 degrees is too cold for me. And so when it was going to be 8, 10, 12 degrees, I I just didn't want anything to do with it. So I waited until Friday. Now, I knew what the forecast was. So, in spite of what it was like here in Ardmore, I decided to go ahead. When I pulled out of my driveway on Friday morning, it was 8 degrees. Now, I had about 14,000 layers on. And like I said, the weather forecast was for it to warm up really, really well. Got down there, sure enough, even though it was somewhat cloudy, no wind whatsoever, and with all of my bundles, with all of my layers and everything, it was good. And then, of course, I'm filming this on Sunday morning. But yesterday, on Saturday, the sun was out, the wind was not blowing, and it got up to 50, I think 56 degrees. I actually had to take my top bundle off. Now, it wasn't that much of a successful swap meet by any stretch of the imagination. I I sold very, very little stuff, and I bought even less stuff. So it was really disappointing in that way, but it was good to get away. I got to see a bunch of my friends, my car buddies, so to speak. So it was a good time to get away. And if you put enough clothes on, you might not be able to move, real smoothly, gracefully, etc. But at least you won't be freezing to death. So anyway, hope you had a fantastic weekend. Uh, hope yours was better than mine. Okay, we are coming back to Daniel chapter 12 as we continue our study of the feast days of Israel, and we are currently focused on Sukkot. Sukkot was also known as the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Harvest. Several different names and descriptions were applied to Sukkot. I'm using Sukkot because it's the quickest, easiest, the briefest, if you please. And we've been focused on Daniel chapter 12, and here's the reason why. Because Sukkot is all about the harvest. Sukkot was all about the resurrection. Sukkot was all about the end of the age. And Daniel, of course, in what scholar after scholar calls the clearest Old Testament prophecy of the resurrection of the dead, predicted, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall arise, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting condemnation. And that would be at the end of the age. It would be at the time of the end. Now, at this point, I've got to offer a correction. I cited the New American Standard. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. I cited the New American Standard. I actually read it. It was the version that I have is 1987, and I made mention of the fact that there was a tremendous controversy over their rendering of Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, as end of time. And I made the comment that the controversy was so great that in later translations, later versions, that they actually changed it. Well, some of you pointed out to me that there actually are some other later versions, later than 1987, that still render it end of time. So I was wrong to say that only the 1987 version renders it as end of time. So I apologize for that. Um, I was simply aware of all of the controversy surrounding that 1987 translation. So again, I was wrong in saying that no other rendering of the New American Standard has end of time. But let me reiterate the point, which is correct, that there are only a tiny, I'm talking really, really minor number of translations that render this as end of time. All you got to do is go to BibleGateway.com and look up Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, and then hit all English translations. And it will bring up not every single English translation that's been produced, but the vast majority of them. And you can just read for yourself. And you will find that end of time has a little bitty teeny representation, and time of the end is by far the preferred rendering under the most widely recognized translations, the most highly respected translations. Okay, with that said, let's move on now to go back to examine what Daniel chapter 12 is talking about. Now remember, we're demonstrating that Sukkot, which foreshadowed the resurrection, is being demonstrated in Daniel chapter 12 in its prophecy of the resurrection. Jesus said the harvest, Sukkot, would be at the end of the age, and that would be when the righteous would shine forth as the stars in the firmament. A direct citation, an echo, if you please, of Daniel chapter 12. So here is Jesus applying Daniel chapter 12 to the end of the age harvest that he is talking about. And keep in mind, harvest is the fulfillment of Sukkot. So, once again, I've been spending time on Daniel chapter 12 to help us see how critically and important it is that Daniel is very clear about when Sukkot would be ultimately, eschatologically fulfilled. Number one, it would be at the time of the end. Once again, not at the end of time. So what is that time of the end? Now look, folks, biblically speaking, you could have a time of the end for almost anything. In Daniel chapter 8, you have the last days of the Grecian Empire, and you have the time of the end of the Grecian Empire. But context determines what that time of the end was going to be. And Daniel chapter 8 doesn't mention resurrection. There is no prophecy of the resurrection there, like there is, pardon me, in Daniel chapter 12. Are there similarities of language? Yes, there are. But there are distinctions of motif, distinctions of elements that tell us Daniel 8 is not Daniel 12. Okay. So we continue this morning. Don't have much time left this morning. We continue with our examination of what Daniel chapter 12 said about the time. This, I think, if I remember correctly, this is video number 4 in our discussion of the timing of Sukkot, of the fulfillment of Sukkot. So I'm going to read verse 4 again, okay? And I'm reading from the good old King James this morning. It just happens to be the Bible that was closest at hand. Okay, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swore by him that lives forever and ever, and it shall be for a time, and times, and a half a time, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be fulfilled. Now, last week I shared with you how I have engaged different individuals who tried to avoid the force and the power of verse 6 and 7. One brother said, well, yeah, the angel asked, what shall be the end of these wonders? And he then proceeded to delineate and divorce the resurrection from those other events. Well, which would mean he would have to divorce the time of the end and the end of the age from that reference to wonders as well. And it just simply doesn't work. Notice that the angel, in responding to the question, when shall these things be? What shall be the end time fulfillment of all of these wonders, or of these wonders? And heaven's answer was, it should be for a time, times, and a half time. And when they have fully accomplished the shattering of the power of the holy people, now notice what he says, all of these things. There is no qualification here. It is all of these things will be fulfilled. Now, grammatically, all of these things has to refer, obviously, back to the question of the angel. What shall be the end of these wonders? But in order to find any delineation in the text, then you have to say, well, the Great Tribulation is a wonder. But the promise of the resurrection, now that's not a wonder. Because if it's a wonder, then that would mean that the resurrection would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. That's exactly what that would mean. And it would mean, in order to find that delineation, you would have to say that the end of the age is not a wonder. And you would have to say that the righteous shining forth as the stars in the firmament was not a wonder. This is taking a razor blade to the text. And it is saying the resurrection could not be considered a wonder. Now go back and watch the video from last week in which I demonstrated that simply does not work based on John chapter 5, 24 to 29. Okay, so heaven's answer was very, very clear. When they have completed or when they have shattered the power of the holy people, all of these things shall be fulfilled. Very quickly, I'm out of time now, but in one of my very first formal public debates on preterism, my opponent got up and appealed to the resurrection. It has to be in our future. So I presented a chart on Daniel chapter 12. Now I want to tell you, I was watching him at his table. And when I quoted verse 7 in the chart, his face fell off and rattled around in the floor. He had no answer whatsoever. So he gets up and he says, well, just because it says all these things doesn't mean that it means all these things. Well, knowing some of his other positions, for instance, on Matthew 24, in which Jesus said this generation shall by no means pass away until all of these things are fulfilled. And I knew that my opponent believed that all of the antecedent elements were fulfilled in AD 70. That's what he believed. So I got up and I asked him, tell us how you know that all of the antecedent elements were fulfilled in AD 70. And he got up, obviously without thinking, and said, I know that all of the antecedent things were fulfilled because it said, Jesus said, this generation will not pass until all of these things are fulfilled. And there was just a buzz that went out through the audience. They understood he had entrapped himself. He had literally destroyed his own claim. So I got up and I made a chart very hurriedly. And I said, okay, my opponent says in Matthew chapter 24, the reason that we know that all of the antecedent elements in Matthew 24, 4 to 34 were fulfilled is because it says all of these things will be fulfilled. And that means all of those antecedent things. I said, now let's go back to Daniel chapter 12. How do I know that all of the antecedent things, including the Great Tribulation, which, by the way, my opponent put in the first century, how do we know that the resurrection was included in spite of my opponent? How do we know that the end of the age was in AD 70, as my opponent agrees? How do we know all of that? Well, because one angel asked the other, when shall these things be? And heaven said, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things shall be fulfilled, which means all of the antecedent elements would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. He never said another word about Daniel chapter 12. And that's because there is no other word to be said. Tomorrow, we're going to build on heaven's answer. When was Sukkot? When was the resurrection going to be fulfilled? It would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. And we will talk about that terminology on the flip side. I'll see you there.